Welcome to the second podcast of Madco Spirits. This episode we're going to be focused on the Martini. The Martini is a cocktail invented in 1292 by Scatman Crothers, and I'm just making all that up. That's not true at all. We're going to talk about the actual background of the Martini. I think Eli's going to talk about that a little bit first.
I'll jump in there?
Sure.
All right. A lot of the history of the Martini is really just conjecture. Like a lot of classic cocktails, there's not like one solid definitive place of origin or person or anything, but there are plenty of stories of variations, which is kind of what we're here to talk about today, and where they came into play and such. So I think the problem with a lot of these cocktails, I shouldn't say problem, none of them are a problem, but is that they're very basic in their ingredients and their combinations. I mean, if you talk about like a classic 2-to-1 ratio Martini, who's to say who's the first person who mixed those two ingredients? You'll find that with a lot of older cocktails, such as the daiquiri or something. I mean, every sailor was running around with a bunch of rum. Of course, someone's going to put a lime in it. So the best you can do with a lot of this is just to find your different stories, and really it's more interesting that way, I think, because who wants to just hear one cool story when you can hear a dozen? Rick, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think so. There's a couple different schools of thought, and one is that it's kind of the East Coast West Coast battle, or basically the four stories that I heard, and it's either it was out in the Bay Area in San Francisco in the sort of late 1800s or second part of the 1800s with guys like Jerry Thomas and a couple of other contemporaries, or it's New York City. So. The San Francisco theory is really more along the lines of another cocktail called the Martinez, which is very similar to the cocktail we talked about last week, which is Manhattan, except it's gin. So you start with a base of gin, there's sweet vermouth and bitters, and there's a couple of other things potentially going into that drink, but that's kind of the basis of it. And when you think about the history of gin at the time, it was very much in that Old Tom style. It was a little sweeter, a little maltier. Sometimes it had a little age on it, and so it wasn't too far off from a lot of the whiskeys of the time. So you could definitely see like a blending together of those things. So that's kind of the theory I like. But there's definitely like that New York thing too. I know there was a judge back in the late 1800s in New York who was a frequenter of one of the social clubs out there, and his last name was Martini, and so they think that maybe he was the guy who invented it. Again, like Eli was saying, nobody really knows, but...
and so, like Rick was saying, with the Martinez, it was like a sweeter, maltier kind of gin. Once London Dry became like very popular, they switched the vermouth that was in it to match that type of gin, which is probably most likely where the Martinis we're drinking today come from.
Gotcha.
Yeah. What I could find too was that the original Martini was probably sweet vermouth, and like you say, with some of these older spirits like your Old Toms or Genevieres, even a lot of people, like cocktail historians, would say they were probably barrel aged for a little while, so you're going to get like a little bit darker drink anyway. And then around 1900 or shortly thereafter, the dry Martini was born, and that kind of became the new standard. But gin started as a Dutch spirit. It was Genevieve, it was maltier, it was funkier, and then England kind of, I won't say stole, but kind of the whole gin thing, and then the London Dry style kind of hit the craze, and that's what everyone's still stuck on today. But
Mother's Ruin.
Mother's Ruin.
Yeah.
Well, there's like the one interesting aspect where it really branched off the Manhattan. It had the same, almost exact base with the bitters and orange and all that kind of stuff. One interesting theory I read was Martini, Martini and roasting and all that stuff, actually started becoming the most prevalent vermouth to come in with their sweet and then eventually their dry. And I kind of like the fact that the whole thing was started mostly by a marketing ploy of theirs to get the name to change and all that kind of stuff, because everybody had their vermouth. Interesting enough also is, I believe it was Cocktail Bill's book, because someone asked me one time, where did the olive come in if there's always maybe lemon in the old books? And his book actually had it almost exactly as, Jerry Thomas did and all that stuff with the dry vermouth and everything as it became the martini by the 1900s. But then eventually, for some reason, his book said to make it the exact same way, but on the side put an almond and a cocktail olive. And I don't know why you would serve someone just a single cocktail olive, but yeah, it's definitely most like any classic one. It depends who you ask, but it's pretty obvious that they all stemmed from the same idea of making sweet vermouth with this, and then eventually there was a dry style because everybody started wanting drier things as Amaros came more into America and stuff like that.
I think the most interesting thing about our topic tonight, and that everything I've heard from you guys so far already, is that the martini seems so one-dimensional to so many people. Mm-hmm. And when I look at the plethora of insane bottles that are on this table right now of the different things you guys are getting ready to make, I think it's a lot deeper drink than the general public knows about. Definitely. Which I think is great, because I think those are the kind of cocktails that people need most education on, is the fact that you could have a lot of fun with it. You can do a lot more with it. So it's got a lot more backstory. Absolutely. Exactly. I forgot about that one until you just said that, and I've seen them all over the place. So that's really interesting, and I think what do you guys think about when you think of a martini before you started getting into it? What was the normal bare bones first martini everyone talks about? I mean, you kind of talked about that historically a little bit, but nowadays, if someone ordered a martini, what would they be looking for?
Dry martini. They wanted at least the amount of vermouth as possible, and usually vodka, unfortunately. But I mean, even if it's gin, most people want this weird 15-to-1 ratio of their base spirit to vermouth. Of course, there was the big boom from the 50s and 40s and all that stuff of finding any way to not put vermouth in your martini, putting it on the radiator to evaporate into the air and stuff like that as you stir your gin and stuff like that. So it seems like that's what everybody always wants. They go to the bar and they order a martini. They're expecting it to almost taste like chilled vodka or gin.
I would say personally for me, that's something that growing up, my dad and his whole side of the family, they drank vodka martinis, and it was super, super dry, and more often than not in a rocks glass, sometimes with a little bit of ice. They would call that a martini. It's not really a martini exactly, but right. I could sort of see it's just one of those weird, everything kind of goes in phases, and that was definitely a phase for a long time. Sure. So.
What's everyone here's favorite? If we go around the room, when you go somewhere to have a martini, you guys obviously have a lot more knowledge behind the bar. What is it you're looking for now?
It's one of those drinks that I'm really picky about where I order it too, because martini is such a vague descriptor nowadays. I have a lot of people who ask me if I have a martini menu, and I know what they mean, and I can supply that. But generally, if you're going to talk about a martini in the classic sense of the word, there's not a lot of variation. You're not going to have a menu based on that. But you have Cosmos, lemon drops, chocolatinis, everything, all the fun stuff. And a lot of those are great cocktails. You can still balance any of those things and, call it a martini. Really, though, you're talking about a mixed drink, a separate cocktail, separate entity. You're going in a totally different direction. Personally, when I order them, I don't normally go for a 2-to-1 on vermouth, but probably a 4-to-1. I still want to know that there's a good quality vermouth, that's been taken care of, and really, everyone's gotten afraid of vermouths. And I think that's partly on the fault of a lot of bars mishandling vermouth. It is just wine, and it goes bad, and it gets funky, and you get some really not so great flavors out of that if you're not taking care of it. So if you're refrigerating it and going through a bottle every 2 to 3 weeks, suddenly you have this lively ingredient in your cocktail, and to add a little bit of it to anything, especially something so pure as just gin or vodka, you're going to get just a whole new world of flavors that you didn't even know existed in vermouth before. But I mean, I encourage anyone to just take a little bit of dry or sweet vermouth or whatever you have, crack a fresh bottle, maybe chill it a little bit in the fridge, sip on it for a while. Become accustomed to these things again, because really, I think, with the spawning of a lemon drop martini or a Cosmo, something like that, these are a lot of, it's done over the top now, but it's a lot of ingredients that can be offered through a vermouth, like a dry vermouth, a lemony or, some of that oily quality, in a pleasant way. And and I've just really gotten away from that. So I want to taste that in my martini, but I also don't want it to be too dominant. I love gin. I want to taste a lot of gin.
Sure. Do we need to start a petition to save the vermouth? Like,
Bring
Kickstarter.
Yes.
What's the website for that?
I always looked at it too as though I think the modern incarnation of the martini was very much, it was due to people not knowing how to take care of vermouth. You go and you look in the bottle of vermouth has dust all over it. It's been sitting out at room temperature forever and open and oxidized, and so of course that tastes bad. And so people try it in their martini and they're like, oh, that's gross. I don't want that, so I want a super dry martini. They think that vermouth is bad, but it's not. It's just if you don't take care of it, it can be terrible. But that, and then I think the kind of talking about the different out there incarnations of a martini, or they're not really that. I think it's the glass. I think it's that V-shaped glass. People tend to think anything that comes in that glass, that's a martini. And it could be a delicious drink, but it's not necessarily a martini either. So
I think the key to making martinis as popular as they should be is for dishwasher companies to find a way to get the glasses to sit in there. Because I talked to Maytag or Kenmore and say, can you make it to where those and wine glasses will work
And if they
without
could
shattering?
make lipstick resistant,
that
would be great.
Absolutely.
I think something nobody's talked about yet is the dirty martini that is probably the most popular martini, at least in our region right now. Is everyone that comes in and orders a martini is ordering an extra dirty martini, which is do you put vermouth in yours, or do you just do straight olive juice?
No, I mean, if it's going to be masked anyway,
So which olive brine is a shelf-stable product, and it makes you wonder if maybe that's where that transition came from. It's just vermouth was all going bad in these bars, so they found
I think it's kind of part that and what these two were talking about, in the 40s and 50s, and gin was good and vodka was good and people were ordering it without vermouth at all. And then Kevin and I were outside talking, when we were young and coming up, I lived in Chicago, I was 22, I started working at a restaurant. Everyone was like, oh, hey, let's go to this martini bar. That's what we do. We go out after work and we slam a couple martinis. And I was telling him, my friend loved this drink called the Dirty Sanchez, and it was tequila and olive juice, which is obviously disgusting to any normal human being.
Yeah.
But we, at that age, that's what we thought was cool. And the same thing, it came in a cocktail glass, it came in a martini glass, quote unquote. And so I think, that line got very muddied. And then also originally it was gin and vermouth, and then it was only gin, and then it was only gin or vodka, and then it was let's add some olive brine in there. And now, it's how, these little baby steps into this whole new world of no one knows the difference.
I don't mean to sound uneducated about it, but do they sell just olive brine, good brands of that?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, you can buy it as a mixer in a big 1 liter kind of jug, like you would.
They even have a
I'm a terrible host. I didn't even know
olive
that.
juice
I should know that.
infused vodka.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have
Really?
seen that.
I think it's more geared towards Bloody Marys and whatnot, but yeah.
Or Absolute Chicago with rosemary and olive.
Yeah.
You'll always hear people say it too. Oh, it goes great in a martini, or it goes great in a Bloody Mary. So does olive juice. But that, I think Glenn brings up an important point too. I mean, you've got to know your market, and you have to know what the person who's ordering wants. If you bring a bunch of guests over to your house even and you're hosting, not everyone's gonna want some super gin forward martini. Most of the crowd's probably gonna want a dirty martini. And the way that spirits and cocktails have been trending for a long time is that people don't want to taste the finer ingredients in the spirits themselves. They want to taste the spirits less, in fact, and it's more like a means to an end in a lot of cases, which is unfortunate. But you have to know what people want, and ultimately it's up to them what they're drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm making the drink for them. I'm not drinking it. So
I'd like to ask everybody something real quick. I feel like I've done a very small amount of bartending. I'm mostly a kitchen guy, but I know a lot of you have spent a lot of time behind the bar, and for me, I always felt like the martini was the drink that people had the strongest opinions about, and every single person who ordered one liked it a little bit different, and you always had to sort of play 20 questions and okay, first of all, vodka or gin, and then you kind of like,
well, why would you ask me these questions?
do you want
of course
vermouth?
I want it that way.
I've even had people say like, oh, would you like, how much vermouth would you like? Oh, none, of course. Like that was, to them, the norm was no vermouth.
Yeah.
And I've just feel like people have such strong opinions and they're always different. And so
I feel like it's like the hot sauce phenomenon that's going on right now. Speaking of like kitchen and bartending, people want like these big, huge, robust, like overbearing flavors, and you put it on like this delicate dish, and all you taste are capsaicin and like super hot peppers, and then like you lose everything that's in that dish. Where I feel like the dirty martini is that it's super salty and briny and weird, but that's all you get, and it covers up.
Not to say it's not delicious, but I'll drink straight olive juice all day long. It's just not,
Right.
Well, I think that's the big player in that too. Like she said, it's weird, and a lot of people just love to go somewhere and order something they think is going to look impressive and look fancy to somebody, and it's weird. So it sets them apart instead of just ordering what their friend had. The olive juice, I think, came into a big play further on from Hollywood, honestly. Like a lot of, you hear stories like Frank Sinatra used to always have like 4 olives on his martini because he would share them all night and stuff like that. And that just became like a thing. And it continues now, and it's just because the flavor is so different. And they don't generally, and people didn't get accustomed to it, they just don't generally know what the base was, unfortunately.
My take is totally shallow. I think the glass is sexy. I feel sexy holding it. Like I want a drink. I don't care if it's fruity or just straight gin. I want a drink that I know is full of booze. And I look hot holding the glass. It's gonna get me drunk after 3. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm looking for in a martini.
That's the beauty of the martini. I think it's got it all. It's got a lot of elements, and an allure. I think that people order it. So,
for sure.
Yeah, I definitely feel cooler ordering it, and I always wear a black t-shirt and jeans, so I never look like I'm supposed to be holding that glass. But it's a fun time. Yeah.
And another speaking of that too, especially where we are in the world, we'll get a lot of male patrons at the bar, and they'll I want a martini, but absolutely no martini glass. Like they want to, because they want to look like a man.
Right. Yeah.
They don't no pinkies.
Yeah.
Right.
But they want to drink that.
those are the same guys that won't drink rosé wine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's too pink, they don't want to look at it.
Yeah, they stopped rolling joints and they got the vape.
Right on.